Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Lauren Izo. Coming up on this edition. As the midnight deadline looms, Israel will likely avoid a fourth election within 2 years, if lawmakers can finally agree. The U.S. Secretary of State landed in Israel today for a last-minute Middle East peace push ahead of November elections. The question is, who do these deals stand to benefit, Netanyahu or Trump? And are textbooks biased? We'll have an expert in studio that will break down for us how Israeli and Palestinian children are learning about the conflict. Now, some good news to start the evening. Fourth elections averted, most likely for now. Israeli politicians working all night Sunday to advance a compromise that would delay the government's collapse for at least 120 days. With the deadline for passing a state budget just 24 hours away, the Knesset Finance Committee passed a proposal to delay the deadline for 4 months. So the proposal, introduced by MK Tzvi Hauser, is now set to hit the Knesset floor for its second and third readings late Monday, and it's widely expected to pass. Because if it doesn't, the government will automatically dissolve and new elections will be set in motion.
כל הזמן שאחריות לאומית מחייבת הזרמת כסף מיידי לכלכלה שלנו והימנעות מבחירות. ולכן, מתוך אחריות לאומית, החלטתי הערב לקבל את הצעת הפשרה של חבר הכנסת האוזר. ההצעה הזו מאפשרת הזרמת כסף מיידי לאזרחים ולכלכלה של מדינת ישראל. היא מונעת את הצורך בבחירות. והצעת הפשרה הזאת היא התשובה הנכונה לכלכלת ישראל בעת הזאת. זה הזמן לאחדות. זה לא הזמן לבחירות.
Still, deadline or no deadline, many issues remain within the unity coalition that needs to be worked out immediately if fourth elections are to be avoided for good. Well, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Jerusalem following the announcement of Israel-UAE normalization agreement. Will the latest U.S. peace push for Israel help get Trump another 4 years in office? Aaron Porras reports.
While Israel likely won't face an election before next year, the United States will vote this coming November to decide whether or not Donald Trump will stay in office for another 4 years or not. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in Israel today to promote the latest United States push for Middle East peace. Last week, Trump announced a United States-brokered peace deal between Israel and the United Arab Emirates.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו בימים היסטוריים. הסכם השלום שלנו עם איחוד האמירויות פותח עידן חדש של שלום במזרח התיכון.
And more agreements are expected to follow.
Heard again a very, very strong commitment that under all circumstances the United States will ensure Israel's qualitative edge. That has been proved to be true over 4 decades of peace with Egypt, 2.5 decades of peace with Jordan. The United States stood by that commitment, and I have no doubt that it will continue to do so.
Pompeo is also expected to visit the United Arab Emirates, Sudan, and Bahrain during the trip, the latter two rumored to be next in line for a normalization deal with Jerusalem.
I'm very hopeful that we will see other Arab nations join in this, the opportunity for them to work alongside, to recognize the state of Israel, and to work alongside them will not only increase Middle East stability, but improve the lives in each of for the people of their own countries as well.
Jared Kushner, son-in-law and advisor to the United States president, speaking to CNN on Sunday, said that the deal with Abu Dhabi would allow the UAE to have access to purchasing advanced weapons from Washington, specifically the F-35 fighter jets, which Netanyahu vowed would never take place.
The UAE's been trying to get the F-35 for a long time. This new peace agreement should increase the probability of them getting it.
The United States has a legal requirement with respect to qualitative military edge. We will continue to honor that. But we have a 20-plus year security relationship with the United Arab Emirates as well, where we have provided them with technical assistance and military assistance. We will now continue to review that process to continue to make sure that we're delivering them with the equipment that they need to secure and defend their own people from this same threat.
In the run-up to the November vote, the Republican Party will hold its national convention this weekend, which Pompeo will address from an undisclosed location in Jerusalem before continuing to Khartoum and Manama. Meanwhile, it looks like Trump is trying to expand his voter outreach. His party representatives in Jerusalem calling on Americans residing in Israel to vote Republican this coming November.
I'd like to take this opportunity to call upon all 300,000 American citizens living here in Israel to register and vote in the coming elections for Donald Trump and the Republican Party.
Aaron Porras, ILTV.
Dr. Robgeist Pinfold is a Middle East expert from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and King's College London, and he joins us now to discuss. Thank you for joining us, Rob. Well, Pompeo is in Israel on some kind of a PR tour promoting Trump's latest peace initiative, which so far hasn't included Palestinians. Do you think Pompeo will touch on this at all or avoid it altogether? Will we see the Trump administration pushing any kind of peace with Palestinians?
Look, I think you're going to hear a bunch of noises from the Trump administration about pushing peace with Palestinians. It's been the U.S. policy for a very long time now in different administrations that the Palestinians and the Israelis have to reach an agreement and a two-state solution. Will it happen? It's unlikely in the near future. And will any of these words mean anything? Probably not, because relations between the Trump administration and the Palestinian Authority are at a real all-time low. They really have not got on at all, whereas Netanyahu obviously is well known for being very, very close to Trump. I think Trump will be after more low-hanging fruit in the form of relations between Israel and other Arab countries like Bahrain, like Sudan, rather than the more difficult objective of securing a deal between Israel and the Palestinians.
Right, and we saw Pompeo, we know Pompeo was going to Sudan, and we saw that Sudan was sort of backtracking on admitting that they were discussing with Israel making peace. They, in fact, fired an official over talking about it too soon. Is that still in the makings? Will that happen?
Well, I mean, obviously, no one knows for sure. It's anyone's guess, apart from the people that are in the room taking part in these so-called negotiations, if they are actually taking place at all. I mean, look, the fact that Sudan fired this official is probably a sign that they're not going to be rushing into a peace agreement without some sort of full cast-iron guarantees from the United States. For example, we know the states, we had Morocco alleged to be another state that would soon enter into relations with Israel, and the Moroccan government has strenuously denied that today. So I think there is a strong chance of there being a deal between Israel and Bahrain and Israel and Sudan, particularly to help Trump's re-election chances. But right. I don't think it will necessarily be taking place in the coming days.
I do want to go back for a second to the Israel-UAE deal. We saw Jared Kushner speaking to CNN yesterday saying that the deal would make it easier for the UAE to get their hands on the F-35 fighter jet. Now, Netanyahu has said that that is not going to happen. Do you think that it would hurt Israel or help Israel if they were to receive these jets?
I don't think it will matter to Israel if the UAE gets a hold of F-35 fighter jets directly. It's not a direct threat. Israel and the UAE have never really actually been enemies. They've never been in direct military conflict. So in that respect, no, it won't really affect Israel that the UAE gets these F-35 fighter jets. The real issue that Netanyahu is very keen to avoid is any kind of Middle East arms race, any kind of escalation where suddenly other Middle Eastern states say, you know what, they've got these F-35s, we want those F-35s as well. The US is obliged by existing treaties to protect Israel's qualitative military edge in the region. What that means is the Israelis normally have a veto over whether the US supplies these kind of technologies to Arab states. And the question of whether the Israelis are going to allow these F-35s to get to the UAE, that's still an open question. I think there's a lot of room for maneuver. Even though Netanyahu said it won't happen, I think there's significant wiggle room.
Right, we will definitely have to wait and see. Dr. Robgeist Pinfold, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on now, late last week, all over the country, phones were buzzing with the most shocking notification Israelis may have ever received. A young teenage girl alleges she was raped by 30 men in a hotel while on vacation in Eilat with friends. Since, thousands have taken to the streets to demand justice and change. Take a look.
30 men, one 16-year-old girl. It's the crime that's shocking the nation. Now, thousands are protesting the gang rape, which allegedly took place in an Eilat hotel room.
I'm here tonight to protest the awful rape of a 16-year-old girl in Eilat by 30 men and the entire rape culture that exists in this country and around the world. We are expecting the law authorities to take action and give the proper punishment and look for justice in the system.
In total, 9 suspects have been arrested.
From what we understand, she was sexually abused in the southern part of Israel, in the city of Eilat, in a hotel by a large number of men. At the moment, the Israeli National Police have arrested 10 suspects, a number of them being minors that we believed went into the hotel and abused her over a weekend.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu releasing a statement about the case as well, calling it a crime against humanity.
שלומה, מטבע הדברים קשה מאוד, היא במצב נפשי לא פשוט. אנחנו מלווים אותה ותומכים בה בליווי רשויות הרווחה וכל הגורמים הרלוונטיים.
As protests raged over the incident, Israeli authorities on Sunday erased a mural that had been a long-time fixture at a Tel Aviv beach. Activists say it promotes sex crimes. The investigation continues, and authorities say the perpetrators will be brought to justice.
And an intensive investigation is continuing. No doubt there will be more suspects that will be arrested in one of the most severe cases that have taken place in Eilat.
Lauren Izo, ILTV.
Like we just saw, thousands took to the streets of Tel Aviv on Sunday to protest the rape, once again raising a debate about the importance of sex education for minors. Israeli psychologist Dr. Camilla Forkosh-Levan is joining us right now to explain a little more on this subject. Thank you, Camilla, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Obviously, it's a really, really sensitive subject, especially when it comes to sex education for children. I wanted to start by asking you, what age do you think it's appropriate to begin speaking to children about something so sensitive?
So it's a very important topic, and it's very also important to know that there are some differences, depends on the child and curiosity in what you see in development. For instance, there is many people don't know, there is part of sexual development of a child, also sometimes is experimentation and playing and things like that. So often we as parents and adults are not prepared and we don't even know what we're looking at, yes? So it's very important to know that how you will respond to something like that will affect in the future how the child will feel as a sexual being when they are an adult.
So for those parents who maybe don't know that they're supposed to talk to their children about it or maybe too afraid to speak about it, what's the worst case scenario? What will happen to this child when they grow up without this education?
You have to understand that if you will keep your child away from this knowledge, they are basically a sitting duck and much more likely to be caught later on by someone for abuse because they will literally do not understand even what's happening to them. So do speak with them. Do it age appropriately, of course, but do speak to them. And if you're not sure how to go about it, turn to some professional. They will give you, all of us, will give you information.
So that was my next question. Maybe you can give us a few pointers for parents that do want to speak to their children about this subject.
So it's very important to, again, if you see a child playing with themselves, for example, okay? So say it's okay, it's normal, everything is cool, just do it in privacy, so that they feel comfortable with themselves. Yes, as they grow, have the door open, because if you're not going to be talking to them and you're going to feel uncomfortable doing it, so they will go somewhere else and they will get this information, but you now don't know what they know and what they don't know and what's the information, yes? Absolutely. And also it's very important to understand that if they will feel, because they will often feel also uncomfortable, yes? So if they already came to you and the moment they see that you're uncomfortable or you close that door, they will not come back. So it's very important that you as a parent get educated beforehand and feel as much as possible comfortable with this.
Right. You don't want to shut them out or shut down their feelings or anything like that. Now, is there a difference in the way you would approach speaking to a girl as opposed to speaking to a boy? How should I say this? Yes and no, okay? For example, for a girl. So we all know period starts around plus minus, depends on the specific girl, but around age 12. Right. So often parents feel like 12, it's a little girl, because it is, it's a child, and especially it's your child, so she's so small. Except what happens often is that if you don't speak to them ahead of time, they will start to bleed and they think they're dying, so they're very, very scared. So do talk about these things. For a boy, there is no such a thing. They're not gonna feel that they're dying.
crying or whatever, but they will feel sometimes uncomfortable with their body responses, including erection, that they often, as we all know, cannot control, and they don't know what to do with it, and they feel very embarrassed. So talk to them, understand that this is normal part of development, and nothing's wrong with it, and it's fine, and with time you'll be able to control it a little bit better, because sometimes they will feel literally so uncomfortable that they will start feeling as a person bad about themselves.
Right. Honestly, it's really interesting and super important for all parents to remember. Camilla Forkosh-Lavan, thank you so much for joining us today. Now turning to COVID news. Israel's immigration minister, Pnina Tamano-Shata, has tested positive for the coronavirus, also sending 2 other lawmakers, Justice Minister Avi Nissenkorn and the Yamina Party's Ayelet Shaked, into isolation. Also, Israel announcing that a ban on non-Israeli citizens entering the country will now be extended until October 1st. Now, let's take a look at the latest numbers. Since yesterday, there were 962 new positive cases and 2 deaths, bringing the total to 839. Netanyahu spoke on Sunday, reminding Israelis that life is slowly returning back to normal.
עודדנו עסקים לקבל בחזרה, לקלוט בחזרה עובדים. התחלנו את הפתיחה של עולם התרבות, התחלנו את הפתיחה של השמיים, נתנו מענקים לחיילים משוחררים, ועוד ועוד ועוד, ואני אביא עוד תוכניות.
Are school textbooks telling the truth? An independent review shows Palestinian textbooks contain incitement to violence and anti-Semitism. Marcus Sheff, CEO of the Jerusalem-based NGO Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education, who conducted this review, is joining us in the studio to discuss the findings. Thank you, Marcus, for joining us
Thank
today.
you very much.
So tell me what you found in this study. What did you find in the Palestinian textbooks you were looking at?
Well, we've been looking at the Palestinian textbooks now for 20 years, as we look at textbooks across the region, including, of course, Israel's curriculum. And there have been a new set of books, essentially a new curriculum, which came online in 2016. Unfortunately, that curriculum is far worse in relation to UNESCO standards of peace and tolerance in textbooks than anything that we have seen before 2016.
So if you could give me some examples of some of the more shocking things that you found in these books.
Sure. So firstly, I'll tell you what is not there. And what is not there, and was previously in the books, is an appreciation of peace processes that had taken place between Israel and the Palestinians, Israel and the Egyptians, the Jordanians. Practically all of that was removed. And so for Palestinian school children, there was really no idea of peacemaking as the way to resolve conflict. It has all been removed. So the question is, what is there instead? And instead is a truly radical, extreme view of the world. It is a view of violence as the way to resolve conflict. For the Palestinians, one state, essentially, from the river to the sea, one Palestine, which will be gained through violence and through their own personal sacrifice.
Is there a particular way they describe Jews or Israelis in these books?
Well, the Jewish and Israeli other, doesn't exist in these books, except as, a dark, evil caricature, certainly in Islamic studies, where Jews are liars and swindlers, and of course a view of the Israeli army as a dark satanic beast. But the real Israeli other just does not appear, which is of course kind of ironic given that we live side by side and given that there is cooperation still today between Israel and the Palestinians. But the view is of martyrdom, of jihad, of violence, of their own personal sacrifice.
And on the other side of that, when it comes to the Israeli curriculum and Israeli textbooks, there are also, things missing from there. Can you tell us what you found in your research when looking at the Israeli textbooks?
Sure. Well, of course, we study Israeli textbooks extraordinarily closely.
Right.
And I think it's fair to say that, they're not perfect. Curricula are not. Not in the United States, not in France, not in the UK, and not in Israel. But what is important is that they meet easily UNESCO-derived standards of peace and tolerance, which is respect for the other, the individual other, peacemaking is the way to resolve conflict, no hate. Those standards are easily met. Again, not perfect, but peacemaking is suffused within this curriculum from, grade 1 all the way to grade 12. And more importantly, is the way that the other, the Arab other, is discussed in Israeli books. Can there be more? Yes. But does it exist? Absolutely. And not just, if you like, cultural references to Arabs in the region and to Palestinians, but political. And so there is a deep, profound conversation about what happened in 1948. There is a look at 1948 from the Palestinian perspective. The word Nakba, that Palestinian idea of the catastrophe of 1948, is used in a quote by an Israeli Arab MK. So really a profound look at the Palestinian narrative of 1948 in Israeli textbooks. Improvements, always possible. Do they meet those UNESCO standards? Yes, they do.
Very interesting. Marcus Sheff, thank you so much for coming in and telling us about these inconsistencies in education.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Now, this next piece asks, are your kids getting enough exercise? Well, in Israel, the answer is most likely no. And I know that you might think that the coronavirus and lockdowns might be to blame, but the whole world is in a similar state. And Israeli students still rank dead last for the amount of daily exercise they get. A new World Health Organization study on the welfare and health of young people reports that just 14.5% of Israeli students exercise for an hour or less after school. This places Israel in 45th place among the 45 countries in the study. Israel also ranked near the bottom at 42nd place for the percentage of students who exercise every day. Not to leave things as they are, though, Education Minister Yoav Gallant is already responding to the study with plans to promote healthy eating and exercise among Israeli youths. Now, going back thousands of years, new evidence from the days of the biblical judges has been found. A Canaanite fortress discovered by the Israel Antiquities Authority and a group of teenage volunteers. Nittany Manson with the story.
ברוכים הבאים למצודת גלון. המבנה הזה הוא מבנה יוצא מן הכלל. יש לו 4 מגדלים ב4 פינות, הוא נבנה בקירות ובאבנים גדולות ומסיביות ביותר. שימו לב לסף הכניסה שאני עומד עליו, ומשקלו כ3 טון.
The Galon Fortress, built some 3,200 years ago in the 12th century BCE, features watchtowers, a courtyard paved with stone slabs, and rooms on either side. Hundreds of clay vessels and other artifacts have also been uncovered. But the fortress's existence alone is one of the biggest finds, proving that geopolitical tensions were just as high in ancient times as they still are today. Built by the Egyptian-governed Canaanites, the Galon Fortress likely served as a defense outpost against the expanding Philistine and Israelite armies. The Philistine kingdom of Gath to the southwest, and the Israelites in the Judean mountains in the northeast. As you may have predicted, though, the Canaanites didn't fare so well in the long run.
התוצאה הסופית היא שהפלישתים פולשים מזרחה, הישראלים מערבה, והכנענים בסופו של דבר נעלמים.
While returning to the ruins after thousands of years, the site is now being opened to the public completely free of charge. Nittany Manson, ILTV.
Let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight and tomorrow, you can expect clear skies and hot temperatures, the low sitting at 71 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 Celsius. The highs reaching averages of 93 Fahrenheit or 34 degrees Celsius. And now, just before we go, let's see what's going viral in Israel. Well, a group of dolphins were filmed going for a dip off the coast of Haifa, playing and swimming to the delight of onlookers. Beaches in Israel have been designated as protected habitats for dolphins by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. They are so flippin' adorable. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.41 shekels to the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Lauren Izzo. Thanks for watching.